And we are live by the looks of things. Cool. Alrighty, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Creatives on Business with myself, Henry Marsh. And it is my job to chat to all of the amazing creative human beings right around the world and find out how it is that they are making a creative life. My guest across from me, if I can put it in that way, is all the way from India. I had the amazing fortune of meeting this man across from me in Helsinki a couple of years ago. Sidharth from NS Gaia, all the way from India. Welcome to the show. Sidharth, can you still hear me? Okay, fabulous. Sidharth, thank you so much for joining, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. I know that you've been exceptionally busy with everything that's going on in the world at the moment. So for the people out there on the internet, why don't you give us a little bit of a quick breakdown on who is Sidharth and what is it that you do?
I'm just a creative person who like to think a lot about doing stuff creatively, but also when it comes to practical, when you want to be a practical person, you have to think about how you're going to channelize it with things which is going to make it uh, acceptable by other people. So just like I'm just a creative person.
Nice. Okay. And so yeah, as I briefly mentioned in the intro there, yeah, I had the amazing opportunity and fortune to actually photograph some of your collections at the Helsinki Fashion Week back in, I think it was 2018. And yeah, it
Yeah.
was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. What was your road to getting to Helsinki Fashion Week in 2018?
I guess I was doing shows in London that time, and it happened to be scouted by Vogue Italia in India. And then I think Evelyn emailed me about doing a sustainable fashion week in Helsinki. I thought it's a good idea to explore our origins in different countries. Yeah, I just went for it. And it was a really good experience for the brand. You know what's exactly happening around the globe. And that's how we met.
Yeah, exactly. So have you always been into fashion design, or what? How did you get into fashion design originally?
So I was not into fashion at all when I was studying high school. So I was just a creative person, like a homely creative person who used to like to do things on its own and for the family or things like that. But later on, it just went. Like I was not really enjoying what I was studying, so I just thought I should do something which I really like to do. And then later on, NIFT happened in India. That's the college where I have done my graduation in design. So that was a really good, I think, call for me to get into. And then after, I never stopped. Like that was the thing. That's it.
Amazing. So you were studying design. Were you studying fashion design, or what were you studying at university?
It's a 4 year course, so you initially learn about everything. I mean, from like the history of fashion, or like doing a art or sketch, or learning about the history. So it's basically a 4 year experience where you learn each and everything about the design. You have to learn geometry, so a mix of every bit of everything. So later on, you just get into fashion design after a year, and then there is 3 years where you just do get into garments, and yeah, that's how it goes.
Okay, amazing. And so how long ago was that you made the transition into fashion design?
Sorry, I missed it.
Oh, I asked how long ago was that? How long ago? How long have you been doing fashion design?
The brand is now 6 years, and before I worked for 4 years. So I guess 10 years back I was studying.
Okay, okay,
So it's been
and
14 years in total.
okay, um, and so the name NS Gaia. I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. Where does the name come from?
So it's nature and sustainability. So I was working for the brand after college, and then I was just not really enjoying fashion that time because everything was very commercial and everything about was to get into things which have to be and not what you want to do. So I just started reading about textiles, and at that time, sustainability was getting into the fashion world, and nobody really knew about it. So I was just started studying books and stuff like that. So later on, I decided to leave my job and we would travel. And I traveled and I uh, did a research on a craft from India. So that's how I eventually evolved into sustainable fashion from a very scratch. Like I almost left everything and decided to travel. So I think that was a really interesting part for me to evolve myself into fashion and have something meaningful. You know,
Okay, okay. So, do you think a lot of your design inspiration comes from those early days of traveling?
initially it was. I mean, I would say. I mean, I have been traveling not from a year now, but before that, like I've been traveling a lot. So I've been always inspired by the architecture or craft or the culture. Like I like to observe things very closely. So I definitely have like my mind is always working 24/7 whenever I'm traveling. So that's how I get inspired for my collection.
And so now, even now, 10 years on in your design process and establishing the brand, do you still travel as much as you used to, and do you still find as much inspiration from your travels as back then?
And for me, main source of inspiration has always been the nature. So when I'm not traveling, I mean, I've always been traveling somewhere or the other. Like even I like mountains, I like nature, so I do backpacking sometimes. Click a lot of pictures in the forest and stuff like that. So you can see a lot of elements of nature in my collection, like somehow in the prints or in the surface. So it's not like I can't do without traveling. I have to travel. Either I do the backpacking or I go for a travel work or something like that. I had to take a break after 2 months or something. Yeah.
And sort of with the design
I think
process. Oh, sorry. Yeah, carry on.
it goes for every creative person. They need to have a break and a thought process where they want to be free and think like, what's next and how you want to evolve in your work.
Mm.
I think it's really very important to take a break sometime.
Absolutely. I can 100% agree with that. And it's actually interesting that you mentioned taking a break because I've often found, and I know, and I've often said to a lot of people within my own realm of expertise that, when I went into photography full time, I wanted it to be like almost like a 9 to 5 job. I wanted to be shooting every single day because I felt that that was the only way that I could really improve and become a better photographer at the end of the day. But when you do something like that, and especially within the creative realm, you struggle to switch off, and it doesn't just end up being a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. You actually end up working every single day, Monday to Sunday, all hours of the day. I often found myself in those days, especially when I went into it full time and was working for myself. And you're working at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, depending on what it is that your clients want you to do. So taking a break was exceptionally important for me as well, just to step away from the entire creative process. And I've also found, funnily enough, that traveling and backpacking has been a big part and an integral part of my breakaway process. I mean, last year I ended up taking 2.5 weeks off to go walk from Portugal to Spain. I did the Camino. So 100%, I can absolutely agree with you. But your traveling, and especially your backpacking and breakaway trips, do you do those all in India, or do you find that you have to travel internationally? What does your breakaway typically look like?
Not necessary. Like I mean, I just need an opportunity. If it's a work, then well and good because I'm working and then I'm taking a break internationally. But within India, I mean, I get a chance. I just go. Like I don't think it doesn't matter really where I'm going. Just need to be close to the nature, and that's it.
Yes, yes. So do you have a garden there where you are in India at the moment?
But we don't have. I mean, I live in a like apartment,
Okay.
but yeah. So I think that's during my childhood. I used to have like a lot of plants in my house. So I am not originally from Delhi, so I had moved to Delhi for my
Okay.
NIFT schooling. So during my childhood, I used to have like a lot of plants in my house. I always saw like, I mean, that was my main thing. That's how I think that got me into nature from my childhood. So I think that's why I keep traveling. I'm really fond of the nature. That's the main thing.
Amazing, amazing. Um, so we were chatting sort of beforehand, and I sort of started giving you some questions and things that we can discuss briefly. Just to give you a little bit of talking points. And you also mentioned that you wanted to ask me some questions, so I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But with your fashion design and the entire process that you go through, what's one of your biggest struggles when it comes to creating the art that you do?
I think I think creating art is not a big challenge for any artist in general because it's what you think you create. So I think if you want to create it, you will create it eventually. But I think only challenge is how you make it others understand like what exactly what you are doing. I mean, how see the thing is like I'm doing garments, but I have never done things which been trendy, like which is being worldwide acceptable. I'm not into sportswear, or I'm not into something which is ready to wear. So I've been through a lot of, like I've heard a lot of voice from fashion, like you should not do this or that. But at the end of the day, you want to do what you want to do, and then you have to make it acceptable by other people, maybe the media or by your customers, however. I think that's the challenge comes in your way, how you make things work out. Otherwise, creating an artist, I don't think it's a big challenge.
So, how have you managed to work around that problem of not necessarily being the most commercially acceptable fashion designer? Not making ready to wear, not making sportswear, that kind of thing. What have you done for yourself and with your brand to work around those kinds of problems?
So I think with my experience when I was just was done for my college and worked for a brand with a very good brand. But the thing is, like you always get stuck with what you have been seeing and what you have been doing for a while. It becomes your practice. But later, when you do your own thing, you really want to do what you want to do because it's your own baby. So I mean, there are people who will tell you things within our fashion community that okay, you will have to go through. I mean, they will not be directly, but of course, they will always try to guide you. But the thing is, you don't need to hear a lot of voices because if you hear a lot of voices, then you lose yourself. Like you will
Mm.
be lost of there. Am I? Am I going away from your question?
No, not at all. No, you're hitting it on the dot.
Yeah. So that's the thing. I mean, the challenge comes, and then when you do it, you learn yourself, like on your own. When you see the reaction of your customer, when you see it being acceptable, then of course you have to twist it a bit, but not like totally somewhere somehow.
Mm.
You have to you have to adjust somewhere. So, but you don't need to change at all.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier, and we sort of briefly kind of discussed this earlier as well. Like, you've been to a number of different fashion weeks all across the world, and I mean, you've had your images, your pieces displayed over Vogue and Vogue Italy. Have you found that your work is very, very different to a lot of the things that we're seeing internationally, or how do you find that your work sort of starts to fit in or break away? Even how does your work different to everybody else's?
Yeah, I would like to ask you as well, like with your experience, because you have been also traveling and being working with a lot of brands. So, what's your opinion about NS Gaia? How do you see our brand? Like, is it different? Is it what's your reaction about it? Then I can tell you.
Putting me on the spot here. So my experience with fashion, and this is going to sound quite funny to anyone who might be listening and who might know me, but yes, I'm a fashion photographer, or I photograph a lot of fashion, and I've been to a lot of different fashion weeks, and I have been really fortunate to have attended something like the Helsinki Fashion Week, which was a very, very different experience to me compared to the fashion weeks that we have here in South Africa. And this is the part that's going to sound really funny to a lot of people, is I don't necessarily know what looks good in terms of fashion, because everything is so unique and so different. And I feel like regardless of where you are in the world, everyone is trying to bring, or at least I feel like the good designers are trying to bring in their own flavor, their own personality into the work. And so, it immediately becomes a very subjective kind of thing. So, I can't tell you in terms of the whole wide fashion industry what looks good and what doesn't look good, because to me it's all very subjective. But where I think your work does sort of stand out compared to a lot of the fashion and things that I have seen internationally is exactly what you were talking about earlier, in terms of it being far more influenced by nature and being a little bit more grounded, a little bit more earthy and real. I saw that. I remember this very, very specifically being, I want to say backstage at Helsinki Fashion Week, but there wasn't really a backstage. It was just outside the auditorium, or whatever that room was where we were doing the Fashion Week. And I just felt, photographing the girls and the guys outside, that your fashion sort of fits really, really well outside. I remember that feeling very specifically, and especially there's a specific photograph that I got in mind that I took, where there was like we had a lot of wind blowing, and that kind of thing, and it just it just
I remember
worked.
that. You
It
just catch, you just catch the moment really well. Like I was really impressed. Like, that's something very natural what you did.
Oh, thank you. But and it, it was a very natural thing to happen with your fashion. So yeah, that's what I would say about how I've perceived NS Gaia.
Well, thank you. That's I think you said right. It's very grounded. It's very grounded. The brand is about the feeling of the person, about the moment.
So, have you found that that's been your experience internationally? Now, I mean, I don't know how many different fashion weeks you've managed to get your collections at, but if you were to look at your collection versus a lot of the things that you see internationally, would you say that that is sort of what sticks out for you in terms of your own collection?
Wherever we go, we always have like people have loved the pieces, and I mean they can relate to it somehow. it's like you have seen something from your life, an experience or something like that. I mean, because I always talk about what I, I go through, or
Segments of what you just said. Um, Sorry, are you with
can
us?
you? Yeah, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, fabulous. Yeah, sorry. So I missed that what you were saying about your collection internationally.
So I was talking about like how the brand is acceptable internationally, because I think it's the social media. They see into the pictures, and somehow they feel like it's a part of their life or their world. Maybe I don't know what exactly how they approach us, but I mean, being from India and doing things which it's not like we do things something which fits into the national market. Really, we do something really different. I think
Mm.
it's the part, the practical part, and the nature part, and the things which we do around your surroundings. It make them feel comfortable or whatever. Like, just an acceptable brand in the international market.
Yeah. Um, so we were sort of again chatting before we started the live section of this, um, is about the worldwide crisis that's currently taking place. So, how has this affected you and your work at the moment? I know you were saying beforehand that a lot of people haven't been necessarily buying because they haven't really had a reason to go out and wear something nice. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on how everything that's happening in the world has affected you?
So, I mean, I think it's been 3 months, if I'm not wrong, or 2 months, something like that. Things started like to shut down, and we were to lockdown, and we are at online portals with different people or different business channels. But thing is, when you know the fact like nobody has a reason to buy your clothes, you can't accept it. I mean, you can't accept people to buy it. So that I would never get into the thought process that okay, it's not working out. It's not working for everybody. So that's not a problem first of all for just the brand. But it hasn't stopped me to working on my own. I mean, I'm working from home and doing things, thinking about what's next and what will be the next collection. So recently, we just did our Russia Fashion Week, which was scouted by the Global Talent Platform.
Wow.
So yeah, so we did everything from the home. I mean, I did everything from the home, and we just did a small shoot and then made a video out of it. So next thing in fashion is going to be everything is going to be online. That's the fact, because from the sustainable reason also, that's the right way to do things, because first of all you don't need to travel to so many countries from
Mm.
like Paris Fashion Week, there's London Fashion Week, and there's so many. So in order to reduce, you have to really think like what really matters for you now. Before, like, we have pre-fall, and then we have fall, and then we have pre-spring, and then we have spring season. So there are 4 seasons in fashion, which is not necessary.
Mm.
That's how it's. I think that's now it's the time to think about it, like what exactly need to be changed, and that's what I have been doing. Like, I have been just working from home and things forward. Having a few projects has been sort of fun. So that's has been keeping me busy with things. I think it just depends. Like you need to you need to be really active on things what's happening around your surrounding through media or through like uh, Instagram and tap into it.
So I actually want to chat to you about the online fashion week that you did a couple of weeks ago. What was the response around that? What was the reception around all of that?
It was very quick, I would say. Like it's not like when you have a real fashion week on the ground, we wait for the response, or we have a quick response from each other. Like when we meet, if I mean at Helsinki Fashion Week, we see each other. Like we were shooting things and were showcasing, and we got a reaction about each other quickly. Like we can talk about it, but through social media, it's different. Like it's, you have to and it's for the first time, like it's not like something which we had done before. So I mean the response was of course good, because I think everybody's just trying to adopt the whole situation, and they just want to bring things up, like they want to make things normal somehow.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean everyone is just trying to help each other, everyone's trying to collaborate with each other, like uh, in terms of creative minds. So that's how we can cope up this situation. I feel like we really have to uh, work together right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so excuse me, doesn't seem like as much water as I'm drinking. My throat is still dry, um, but I definitely think what you say is true in terms of the whole entire world's. No matter what industry we're in, everything is going to start going more digital, and I myself have been trying to find different ways and means of, sort of trying to keep myself relevant in these times. And I mean, this podcast is a perfect example of that. So, how are you looking at sort of making your designs more or not more acceptable, but more accessible? Is digital something that you guys are looking at a little bit more, especially now during this time?
So I would say it still will take some time. I mean, there are people who are still trying to figure out. Like, it's not because when the buying comes, when the real buy comes, people always like to see the fabric or how they want to wear it and stuff like that. But uh, with the current situation, I feel there's a technology which will bring eventually, and there are things which now it's the garments are made 3D before like you make it practically a real garment. I think it's also good in terms of the wastage, because sometimes we develop a lot of garments which necessarily not required. Like you in the digital media, you can test your collection with beforehand, like how it's been acceptable by your clients or media or whatever. Like, your client can see it digitally, and then maybe they can try it. Like there are technology where things are being tried on social media, or there are different kind of technology which has been coming. So I think that will be really great, and I think it will come eventually, and nothing will happen just now. I think it will take another, I don't know, like 6 months or whatever. But that's a good thing, because then we'll cut on the wastage of non-acceptable things which is not required.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, we've chatted a little bit about your, some of the toughest things that's been taking place in your industry, and everything that's happening at the moment and that kind of thing. What do you think is something that you've been doing right over the last 10 years? Because, again, from someone who maybe doesn't know a lot about fashion, but my perception is that you've achieved a lot of success in the last 10 years, especially with the collections that you've been able to display internationally. What do you think it is that you're doing right?
When I started, I thought I was not doing anything right. Like honestly, I mean, I was not acceptable. Like I was just like a person who was doing things on its own, and others just thought like what I'm doing. I don't know. They had no clue. So when it comes to social media, I think when I started showcasing at Latin Fashion Week in India, that's how it. I mean, I came into the picture of fashion, and then I was not really fit for the Indian fashion. That's how I got. I wasn't kicked out, but I decided to go internationally rather than something which is not understandable for her. You know, like what I mean. Like, so I was just doing what I wanted to do, and I was keep evolving. I was selling also in India a lot. You know, it's not like I was not selling.
Hmm.
So when it comes to fashion, I think you have to have a double thought where you want to make things creatively, but you want to sell it. But it should also come from your same thought process. Like your element should be your own original element, and then you can make it commercial.
Hmm.
And that's the key, I guess. That's how practically it would work. And you keep doing what you want to do. You just have to convince your clients and make them wear it and make them feel good.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, speaking of clients and speaking about selling, you've mentioned a couple of times that you go out and you sell really, really well. What is your process for going out and selling and sort of finding new clients? Do you also find that you have a lot of recurring clients who come back and buy your items over and over again? Yeah, do you want to chat about that?
So, it's very, I would say, I don't know how to explain it, but it's kind of funny, I would say, because sometimes I have a certain styles which I have developed on my own, and it works beautifully because the client orders the same piece in different colors or print again and again. Some of the clients they have like same piece in different color, like four pieces of the same design. So it's really makes me feel okay. I mean, okay, fine. Like like it has worked out. Like
Yeah.
I've been a student what I want to do, but it has worked out somehow.
Okay. Amazing.
So
Um,
that's the thing. So you're saying something.
cool. So I sent you a couple of questions that you could read through, sort of to prepare yourself for for this chat. And something that I think must happen quite often, quite frequently within the fashion industry, and I mean I've seen this at fashion weeks. But what do you do to keep yourself focused when it's just chaos? There's just so much going on. There's so many different things that need to be done. How do you keep yourself focused and on track with your designing and everything that's happening?
For all of us, it's really important to to grasp the knowledge around you, and then it's you have to think like what's good for you and what you exactly want to do. Like what's your next step. It's always easy to pick things when you have so many things around you, but it's you have to have a thought before you get into something, because your next step is always brings you should bring some value to your work or your life or whatever you have been doing. So I would say like don't get stuck with what you have been doing in terms of opportunity or like your work process. Always keep evolving yourself, because you will enjoy your work eventually, because it's about growing personally and professionally. Like, it's a mix of both the things.
Okay. It's a good answer. I often tell people, just I like to think quite tactically, so take it step by step, do the process things, focus on the process rather than trying to focus on the outputs or the end results. And I often find that that's how I manage to.
I'd like to hear from you also. What's your
Yeah, so exactly that. I sort of have the exact same thing where I just, like, even now during this time where we have this massive worldwide international pandemic that's taking place, a lot of people have asked me, how do I stay focused and stay motivated, and what am I doing to stay sane? And it's exactly that. I like to think quite tactically. Every single day I have a bit of a routine. I wake up, I have my coffee in the mornings, and I read a little bit, and I try to write as well. And I'm just sort of focusing on the process, trying to do something creatively every day, trying to make sure I'm just taking one sort of step in the right direction with everything I'm doing. Even I've also started doing like an online course, which is a little bit more design thinking orientated, which I feel like will be quite useful in the future. And it's sort of just sitting down and doing a 10-minute class every day. So, I think about it quite tactically, just very process orientated. And obviously maybe that's a little bit of the engineering mindset that's coming through. But I try not to get bogged down by the macro scale of everything and everything that's going on in the world. And, what am I going to be doing in 6 months' time? Am I going to have a job in 6 months' time? I try to sort of really, really narrow my focus down into the small bite-sized chunks that I can actually really, focus on.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we all just try to grasp things around us, and then we do what we want to do. That's the right way.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think as also as a creative person, it's very, very, very easy to get stuck in the macro mindset of we have these big visions and these big ideas of everything that we want to create, and it can be very, very overwhelming when you think about the overall production. And I mean, I think in the fashion world, it's very similar, especially if you think about something like a fashion week. There are so many different elements that have to come together to make a successful collection for a fashion week. And if you just focus on that big grand scale of everything, it's going to be very, very overwhelming. But whereas if you're just thinking very sort of micro level and just thinking about the process and just making sure that you're doing the steps correctly, I think it makes it a lot easier, and it makes it a lot more bearable.
That's true. Okay.
So, we've been chatting, and obviously I think the lifestyle in India is, I mean, it's very different to where it is here, and each country will obviously also have their own different lifestyle and different changes. But what is something that you find is unusual about yourself in your maybe your habits, something that you do every day that you think is a little bit different to what everyone else is doing?
That's a tough question. That's really.
You mean you're not unusual at all? You don't do anything strange?
I'm very unusual. That's why I don't know how to explain it. I don't fit in that. Like, honestly, when you ask me to go for a party or any social gathering, I don't fit at all. Like, I'm always on my own world. So I have different things to talk about, or like I'm always in a different set of mind. Like even in a practical world, when I get up, like I just do what I like to do, and like maybe have a nice coffee, and then I for an hour I'm muted. I just can't like function. Like I can't have a call, or I can't think about the work or something like that. So it's very different for me. I mean, it's been a challenge to have certain kind of lifestyle, and when you're creative, it's required. I guess like you have to have your own space of mind where you want to function accordingly. Else you will get stuck into unnecessary thing which we call it's required. I don't think everything which has been said, or like in everyday life we do is really need to be done accordingly. I think it's up to us. We have to really find our own way.
Mm. So, speaking about these kinds of things, and you mentioned now that you have to have at least an hour every day where you sort of realign. Do you have a set daily schedule that you follow, or a routine? Something, you wake up and you do the same steps every single day. Otherwise, your day is just not gonna be the way you need it to be.
Honestly, from last, I would say, 2 years, I don't have a routine, which I never wanted to have a routine to follow. But before that, of course, when you start your brand, you always have to be on time. And you don't, even when I'm sleeping or even at 3 o'clock in the night, I'm thinking about the work.
Mm.
So that was a different time when I was busy, but now it's totally different. Like, now I can do what I like to do, and I really don't have a routine right
Okay, cool. So it's just like each day is its own day. You just,
now. Yeah.
take it as it comes. Deal with that day's problems as they arise. It actually sounds a lot like my day. I have a set routine when I wake up, but every single day is different. Like there's no day that's the same for me, and I think it probably would make a lot of other people very crazy. But it's kind of like you don't know what each day is going to hold in any case. So it's like I don't even bother trying to plan for it anymore. Um, so again, and I'm going to keep bringing this back to the fashion side of things because obviously that's your expertise. But what do you think of when you hear the word successful? Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. What do you think of when you hear the word successful?
Um, Kind of, I don't know like how to answer this, but it's always to good to know by others, like by others' reaction. Like, okay, they call you, you are now a successful brand. Now it's been 6 years in the market. You have done so much things internationally, and you have been doing good. So, of course, it feels good, but I don't think I am really on the track, or I can be always on the track unless I don't work every day or I don't move forward. So, and fashion is something which needs change so quickly. Like every 3 months, you have to come up with a new idea or stuff like that. So, in fashion, you can't call yourself a successful brand for always. You have to keep moving on. Keep moving on means you have to think beyond like now what is going on. You always have to evolve. If you don't evolve in fashion, then you are just another brand. So that's what that makes me think. Okay, I don't want to be that, and I never been that. So and then that comes naturally to me. So I always been thinking ahead and thinking to do things which I really like to do. Yeah, I mean I don't call myself like a established brand. I don't think feels right now. Or
So
will be.
so what would it take for you to consider yourself an established brand?
Okay, so like I have my own plans. Like I want to take. I really want to move abroad with my own brand. So it's in the process. If that happens, then that's another ball game for a brand and for me personally. And I keep thinking how to achieve my goals where because see the thing is India is a fashion it is India fashion is growing, it's growing day by day, but the thing is it's just not about the fashion week, it's also about the culture and the
Mm.
kind of work you do is it should be acceptable by mass, not just by the fashion community. So that's how I think I need to evolve, come out of like having be in a certain place where I can connect to more people in day to day, to not just fashion.
So you
So
you
that's what I have been talking about.
okay, okay. So you mentioned now that you're planning on moving the entire brand abroad. Where specifically are you looking to go, or is it a big secret?
So for now, I think of that UK will be the best fit
Okay.
because we have been known in UK really well. We have done 3 shows there, and everybody knows about the brand. So I think UK is a good step to go ahead. Yeah. And London is in particular is very creative place to be surrounded with creative persons. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So actually, I'm going to bring this into a little bit more of a personal sphere here because so you and I actually chat quite frequently, whether it's on Instagram or on WhatsApp. And you recently sent me some of the photographs of your new collection and everything that's gone live. So what was
No,
the
it's really confused and because we have worked together, I wanted to ask somebody. Like, I need to ask Henry, okay, how it's because I'm not really good with like I can figure out about the picture, but the whole detailing and the composition and stuff like that, I had to like I could trust you, so I had to show you. That's how I did.
yeah? I mean the photographs that you sent me were very very different. Did you take those photographs?
No, 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 not
Oh,
really.
okay, okay. No, I was just about to ask because you were talking about the composition and the technical things. So, what was the inspiration behind the photo shoots? Did you have something very set in mind, or something very set in mind, and you'd put together a mood board that you gave through to the photographer to execute on, or was it a bit of a collaboration, or did the photographer just come in and do something completely on his own, his
No, so
her
it
own?
was a collaboration for sure. And the photographer himself, he is not a very commercial photographer. He's from India, though, but he's very arty person and he does things very exclusively and he doesn't take much work. So it was really nice to work with him in person because he really understood the fact about like what I'm trying to say or what I'm trying to portray with my thought process. So basically, it was about the current situation in sustainable fashion where we have been every day seeing the posts on Instagram like okay where the sustainable fashion is going and who is doing right and who is doing wrong. Nobody knows right now. Everybody is just trying to be the right fit at it. Like there are questions about brands. Are they really sustainable or are they going in the right path? So I was just trying to portray like how suddenly things have been all about sustainability and it has become like somehow it has become too I would say like people are taking it fast like sustainability is very hard I feel.
Oh, sorry. I think you broke up there for a slight second. I'm just having a look here. My internet is doing funny things. Been trying to sort this out for a couple of days. Okay, so um, I also wanted to chat to you about, especially I feel like, and you were saying this earlier, with regards to fashion, it's an ever growing thing and something that's always morphing. And you said sort of, every 3 months you've got to come up with a new idea. You can never call yourself successful as a fashion brand because it's always evolving and it's always changing, and you always have to be coming up with new ideas. With everything that you've learnt in the last 10 years of establishing this fashion brand, what would you go back and tell yourself 10 years ago? What advice would you give yourself?
10 years ago.
Yeah, if you were to go back in time, you as Sidharth right now, what would you tell Sidharth 10 years ago?
Oh, that will be great. That will be really great actually. I would not think about like what like what is meant to be done in fashion. Like I would really do like I I, I would just do things which is not been like I won't be afraid about doing anything which I have been doing right now. Like 10 years back, I was like thinking madly like if I'm doing things right or wrong or whatever. Like I was confused because when you do something which is not really acceptable, then yeah, you have to go through a lot of thought process and the questions come to your mind. Yeah, that difference I think it will make if I go back 10 years back. Because I would know what is the fact, what's the fact is.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I ask this question to every single one of my guests, and it's always my favorite question to ask because it's always so interesting to hear what
Really
people say.
correct. That would be really good. Like okay, in 10 years I think I have learned a lot and understood a lot about things.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, so Siddhartha, we're going to start wrapping up here shortly. Before I ask you the last questions, you mentioned when we were chatting on WhatsApp, and I asked you to be on the podcast with me. You said you wanted to be on the podcast, and as long as you can ask me some questions. So, is there anything you want to ask? Anything that you want to know?
I think now we know pretty well about ourselves. So the only question I think I would have from you, where do you see yourself in 5 years, or what you want to become in a fashion, on art, or any creative field? Like how you see yourself as a like a big great photographer or something else or whatever. Because I've seen your work and I really want to. I'm very inquisitive person when it comes to anything. Like I really want to know. When I get the opportunity, I try to get to know things. So yeah, that's my question. So you.
Cool. It's a good question. It's a good question, and it's definitely, I think, as a creative person, to be inquisitive or have an inquisitive mind is definitely a good asset. Um, so to answer your question, Siddharth, I try very hard not to think about where I'm going to be in sort of like 5 years time. I don't really try to give myself a time horizon for for success or for what it is that I want to achieve. I've been known to say to a lot of my closer friends, things have been really strange for me in the last 2 years or so, simply because, when I started photography and when I went into it full time, I'd set myself different goals, different set of things that I wanted to achieve. I didn't set myself a time span of when I wanted to achieve them. I just set myself this list of goals. I wanted to be a live speaker at an expo, and I wanted to shoot for SA Fashion Week, and I wanted to get published in an international magazine, and just these are just a couple of examples. But what was interesting was I'd set all these goals, and within my very first year of going full time into photography, I'd hit every single one of those goals. And so my second year of photography, I set myself the goal of sort of just doing double of everything, doing more of everything. And, this is now my fourth year of doing photography full time. And it's kind of been a process for me trying to figure out what the next steps are. So I've kind of set myself a 2-year goal, shall I say. I haven't really thought as far as 5 years from now, but I've set myself a 2-year goal of just trying to establish myself a little bit more within the South African markets, whether that's here in Pretoria, Johannesburg, or even in Cape Town. Just establishing myself as a solid brand, someone that people can definitely go to for good quality images. And just as I was mentioning earlier about not trying to get too stuck in the macro and just focusing really, really hardcore on the micro and focusing on the process of putting one foot in front of the other, focusing on the process, focusing on the day-to-day. And hopefully in 2 years' time, I'll be able to reevaluate. But to answer the other side of your question in terms of being a photographer and being an artist and being creative, that is something that I've been focusing a lot more on recently. I obviously come from an engineering background. That's what I qualified as. And I've always thought of myself as a very technical photographer, someone who gets the technical side of photography right. And I've always struggled with the creative side of things. And so now, having the last 4 years, having established myself within the market and people know who I am, and they know the kind of quality of work that I'm putting out, I've only now, literally in the last 6 months, have I actually started giving myself the freedom to creatively express myself and to creatively go out and look for the projects that really, really interest me. So I think going forwards, that's definitely something that I want to focus on a little bit more, is the creative side of art, the creative side of photography. I was watching something by someone who's a really big inspiration to me, Sean Tucker. He put out a video about creating meaning within your art, and I think that's something I want to do a lot more of. Is I don't want to take on as many projects as I have. As I said earlier, I like to work every single day, and I think I'm wanting to take on less projects, but do more projects that have meaning or create meaning in the projects. And I think that's something I'm definitely going to be focusing on for the next couple of years.
That's amazing. That's really good to hear that you want to do something meaningful.
Yeah. I think, and I think, photography is an interesting place where, and I'm starting to see this, more and more as I get into photography, is moments. And we were chatting about this earlier with your collection that I photographed at Helsinki Fashion Week. Just those moments, capturing the moments, and sort of establishing the meaning of those moments. We were saying, how your collection fits in really, really well with nature and how it's grounded. I want to be creating more of those kinds of things. So, yeah.
That's great. Hopefully we would have a opportunity to work together.
Absolutely. I'm hoping so. When this pandemic finally ends out at some point, I'm hoping obviously that we can get together at some point. We've chatted. I said I want to come to India sometime, so hopefully I can make it to India before you make your big move.
It's full of nature.
Yes. So I'm hoping I can catch you in India before you make your big move to the UK. Sidharth, thank you so much for chatting with me this last hour or so. Where can everybody on the internet find you? You've spoken a lot about social media. Where can people find you?
That's Instagram or website.
And is that just NS Gaia?
Yeah.
Everywhere.
NS Gaia.
Okay, perfect. So I'll leave the details in the YouTube comments below. And then, Sidharth, my last question to you is, if you could put a message out into the world, sort of, if you had this microphone in front of me and everyone had headsets on, and you could just say something to the whole wide world right now, what message would you give?
I would just say, live your life freely. That's how you have to go about it.
Awesome.
Just do what you would like to do.
Good. I like that. Sidharth, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. To everyone who's...
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a big pleasure. Yeah, it's been such a big pleasure having you on the show. And to everyone who's been watching the live stream and everyone who might be listening to the podcast at some point in the future, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining in for another episode of Creatives on Business. My name is Henry Marsh. I'll catch you guys next time. Okay, I'm going to end the live stream over here. That's